Picture this for 1 second. Marcelo Bielsa, one of the most respected football minds on planet Earth, sitting frozen on a Powerade box while 8 minutes of stoppage time are bleeding away. Uruguay, a two-time World Cup champion, a country with football history carved into the bones of the sport, is scrambling just to survive. And across the field, Cape Verde, a nation made up of tiny islands in the Atlantic, a country with barely 500,000 people, a team most casual fans probably could not point to on a map before this tournament started. And yet there they are, dancing after clearances, throwing bodies in front of shots, celebrating like every tackle is a goal, and making one of football's old giants look nervous. That right there, to me, is the image of this World Cup. Not the billion-dollar stadiums, not the flashy opening ceremony, not the corporate slogans. It is the underdogs looking straight at the football establishment and saying, "Nah, we are not just here for the postcard." And honestly, that is exactly why this story hits different. Because this was not supposed to happen. FIFA expanded this World Cup from 32 teams to 48, and they sold it like a beautiful global football dream. More nations, more cultures, more fans, more chances for smaller countries to finally step onto the biggest stage in sports. Sounds amazing, right? But let's not act naive. This was also about money. More teams means more matches. More matches means more TV rights, more tickets, more sponsors, more global inventory, more everything. FIFA did not accidentally build a bigger tournament out of pure love for the game. They built a bigger machine. But here is the twist, and this is where it gets really interesting. That same machine they built for profit may have accidentally created the greatest underdog stage the World Cup has ever seen. I'm Jemmy, and today I want to talk about something way bigger than one draw, one upset, or one emotional celebration. I want to talk about how the little guys are hijacking this tournament, why the big teams suddenly look uncomfortable, and why FIFA might be realizing that when you open the door for the world, you cannot control who walks through it. And before we go deeper, I want you to think about this question. Are these underdog stories proof that football is finally becoming more global? Or are they exposing the fact that the giants are not as untouchable as we thought? Keep that question in your head, because by the end of this video, your answer might change. Let's start with Cape Verde, because their story feels like something Hollywood would reject for being too dramatic. The Blue Sharks stepped into their first World Cup ever and immediately had to face Spain. Not some mid-table team. Spain, the reigning European champions. A squad loaded with talent from Barcelona, Real Madrid, Manchester City, and the biggest clubs in the world. Before kickoff, almost nobody gave Cape Verde a real chance. People might have said respectful things on camera, because that is what you do. But deep down, most fans expected Spain to control the ball, break them down, score 2 or 3, and move on like business as usual. That is how these stories are usually written. Except Cape Verde did not follow the script. They held Spain to a scoreless draw. And not in some lucky, messy, total chaos kind of way. They fought, they stayed organized, they suffered when they had to suffer. And they trusted their goalkeeper like their whole nation was standing behind him. Their 40-year-old keeper made huge saves, the back line kept grinding, and Spain kept running into a wall they were never supposed to struggle against. After that match, people still tried to explain it away. Maybe Spain were rusty, maybe Cape Verde just had one of those magical nights. Maybe the big boys would wake up next game and restore order. That is what fans always say when the underdog refuses to disappear. They call it a fluke because the alternative is too uncomfortable. Then came Uruguay. And that is when the fluke excuse got thrown straight out the window. Uruguay are not just another strong team. This is a nation with World Cup trophies, Copa America history, and a football identity built on pride, edge, and survival. They know how to suffer. They know how to fight. They know how to make games ugly and still walk out alive. So when Cape Verde lined up against them, most people expected the Islanders to finally get punished. Spain might have been frustrated, sure, but Uruguay were supposed to bring reality back into the room. But Cape Verde came out like they did not get the memo. They were not just parking the bus and praying for mercy. They were brave. They pressed when they could. They attacked when the chance came. And then Kevin Pina stood over a free kick from distance. The wall split, the shot flew through, and suddenly Cape Verde had their first World Cup goal in history. Let that sink in. Their first goal ever at this level, and it comes against Uruguay, a country that helped build the mythology of the World Cup itself. That is not just a goal. That is a moment a nation remembers forever. Now here is where the story becomes even more emotional. In the stands, families, fans, and people from the Cape Verdean diaspora were watching something they probably dreamed about, but never fully believed they would see. Imagine being a parent, watching your son, your family, your country, your people standing toe-to-toe with one of football's royal bloodlines. That is why underdog football matters. It is not just tactics. It is not just formations. It is identity. It is representation. It is a small country looking at the world and saying, "You may not talk about us often, but today you will." Uruguay did what big teams often do. They punched back, they scored, they took the lead. And at 2-1, most people probably thought, okay, there it is. The natural order is back. Cape Verde made it interesting, but Uruguay will close the door now. The Giants always find a way, right? That is the comfortable story. That is the safe version of football. But Cape Verde refused to accept it. They kept pushing. They kept believing. Then came the defensive mistake, the equalizer. And suddenly, it was 2-2. Helio Varela scores. The Cape Verde players dance. Bielsa sits motionless. And the whole world gets one of those rare World Cup images that does not need a caption. And that is the part one cannot stop thinking about. Cape Verde were not just surviving those final minutes. They were finishing strong. They were not begging for the whistle. They were still dangerous, still alive, still confident. That is when you know an underdog has crossed a line. There is a difference between a team that gets lucky and a team that starts believing it belongs. Cape Verde looked like they belonged. And once a team like that starts believing, things get scary for everyone else. Now step back for a second and look at what this means. Cape Verde are a country of just over 500,000 people, spread across islands off the coast of West Africa. Their squad is built from a diaspora that stretches across different countries, clubs, and football cultures. They are not built like Spain. They are not built like Uruguay. They do not have the same money, the same infrastructure, the same global brand, or the same media machine behind them. But what they do have is hunger. They have connection. They have players who know this might be the biggest stage they ever get, and they are playing like every minute is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And that is what makes this so dangerous for FIFA's perfect little business plan. Because the expansion was supposed to create more stories, yes, but it was also supposed to keep the Giants in the spotlight. The idea was simple. Bring in the smaller nations, sell the inspirational narrative, let them have their moment, and then let the major football markets carry the knockout rounds. Spain versus Brazil prints money. Argentina versus Germany prints money. England versus Portugal prints money. But Cape Verde versus Curaçao? From a pure corporate point of view, that is not exactly the dream broadcast package. And yet that is exactly what makes it beautiful. Football does not always care what the executives want. And speaking of Curaçao, their story might be even crazier because it starts with humiliation. Curaçao are tiny. We are talking about a Caribbean island with around 156,000 people, the smallest nation by population and land area ever to qualify for a World Cup. To put that in perspective, some major stadiums can hold more than half of their entire population. That is not just small. That is almost impossible to process. When they qualified, people called it historic. When they arrived, people called it inspiring. But after they got smashed 7-1 by Germany, the critics came out fast. You already know how this goes. The second a small team gets destroyed, people start saying the tournament is watered down. They say these teams do not belong. They say the 48-team format is ruining the quality. And look, I get the argument. Nobody wants the World Cup to turn into a charity event where teams are just happy to be there and the Giants are dropping 7 goals every afternoon. But here is the thing. Football is not one match. Football is response. Football is what you do after the embarrassment, after the critics laugh, after the world decides you are just a nice little story that got exposed. And Curaçao responded like lions. 6 days after getting blown out, they walked back onto the field against Ecuador and fought their way to a 0-0 draw. Ecuador are not some random team either. They have serious players, serious athleticism, and serious quality. This was not supposed to be easy, but Curaçao held them. They suffered, yes. They needed their goalkeeper, absolutely. But that is football. Sometimes survival is an art form. Sometimes a clean sheet against a superior opponent is as loud as a 4-ball Leo win. And Eloy Room, their 37-year-old goalkeeper, gave the kind of performance that turns players into national legends. 15 saves. 15. At a World Cup. That is not just a good game. That is a man standing in front of history and refusing to move. He had spent plenty of his career outside the brightest spotlight, but for one night he became the center of the football universe. That is the magic of this tournament. You can be overlooked for years, and then one game can make your name permanent. One performance can put you in every highlight package, every newspaper, every conversation. Now tell me honestly, how can anyone watch that and say these teams do not belong? Maybe they do not have the depth of Germany. Maybe they do not have the star power of Spain. Maybe they do not have the tournament pedigree of Uruguay. But belonging is not just about trophies. Belonging is about earning your place in the moment. And Curaçao earned theirs. Cape Verde earned theirs. These teams are not decorations. They are not filler content. They are not background characters in someone else's movie. They are actively changing the plot. This is where the format becomes fascinating. In the 48-team setup, the top 2 teams from each group advance, plus the best third-place teams. That means the margins are different now. One draw can matter. One heroic goalkeeper performance can matter. One upset can blow open an entire group. A small country does not need to dominate the tournament to survive. They just need one moment of belief. One mistake from a giant. One night where the ball bounces their way. And suddenly the bracket starts looking very different. And this is exactly the part FIFA probably did not think through emotionally. They opened more doors. They created more pathways. They gave underdogs more oxygen. And now those underdogs are breathing fire. The small teams are not just showing up, exchanging shirts, taking pictures and heading home. They are taking points. They are making giants uncomfortable. They are making fans ask new questions. And most importantly, they are making the tournament feel alive. Because let's be real, this World Cup has not been perfect. We have seen empty seats. We have heard complaints about insane ticket prices. We have watched logistical problems, visa drama, VAR controversy, refereeing chaos, and all the usual noise that comes with a tournament this massive. There has been a lot that feels corporate, heavy, and overproduced. But the underdogs feel pure. They feel like the reason people fell in love with football in the first place. No polished marketing campaign can manufacture the emotion of a tiny nation stealing a point from a giant. No sponsor can buy that moment. No boardroom can script that kind of joy. And that is why I think FIFA's nightmare is also the fans' dream. FIFA wanted expansion to grow the business. Fans are watching expansion grow the drama. FIFA wanted more global markets. Fans are getting more global emotion. FIFA wanted big teams to carry the later rounds. Fans are now asking, what if the little guys crash the party? What if Cape Verde make the knockouts? What if Curaçao somehow keep fighting? What if a team that was supposed to be a footnote becomes the headline? This is not new, by the way. The World Cup has always needed underdogs. The trophy itself almost always ends up with the same elite circle. Only a handful of countries have ever won it. Most tournaments eventually bend back toward the giants. But the journey, the emotion, the memories, those often belong to the teams that were never supposed to go far. Costa Rica in 2014 walked into a group with Uruguay, Italy, and England, and somehow finished on top. Morocco in 2022 made history for Africa and the Arab world by reaching the semi-final and knocking out giants on the way. South Korea in 2002 turned a home tournament into a national earthquake. Croatia, a country with a population smaller than many major cities, reached a final and then a semi-final in back-to-back tournaments. These runs are not side stories. They are the soul of the World Cup. So when people say the expanded format is ruining the tournament, I think the answer is more complicated. Yes, the quality gap is real. Yes, there will be blowouts. Yes, some matches will look uneven. But football has never been great because every game is balanced on paper. Football is great because paper gets ripped up. The spreadsheet says Spain should beat Cape Verde. The market says Uruguay should handle the pressure. The odds say Curaçao should fold after Germany. But the ball does not read spreadsheets. The ball does not respect market size. The ball does not care about television ratings. That is why these stories hit the audience so hard. They remind us that football is still human. A player can be nervous. A giant can panic. A goalkeeper can enter God mode. A coach can get outthought. A team with nothing to lose can become the most dangerous team on the field. And in a sports world that is becoming more data-driven, more commercial, and more predictable in some ways, that kind of chaos is priceless. Now here is my question for you, and I really want you to answer this in the comments. Are you rooting for the underdogs because they make the tournament more emotional, or do you still believe the World Cup should be reserved for only the strongest teams? Because I can see both sides. The traditionalists want elite quality every match. I respect that. But me, I want moments. I want pressure. I want the big team sweating. I want to see a country with 500,000 people make a football superpower question itself. I want to see fans who waited their whole lives for 1 point celebrate like they won the trophy. That is not watering down the World Cup. That is expanding its heartbeat. And think about the players themselves. For some of the stars on the big teams, this tournament is another chapter in a long career filled with Champions League nights, title races, and international fame. But for many of these underdog players, this is the chapter. This is the moment their families will talk about forever. This is the game their kids will watch years from now. This is the reason an entire island, an entire diaspora, an entire community stops everything and believes. When you understand that, you understand why they run harder, why they defend harder, why every clearance looks like a celebration. They are not just protecting a result, they are protecting history. And the beautiful irony is that FIFA may have accidentally given football back to the people while trying to sell more of it to corporations. That is the part that makes this whole thing feel almost poetic. The expansion was supposed to be a money play, more inventory, more games, more markets, more control. But football has a funny way of slipping out of control the second the whistle blows. Once the game starts, the sponsor boards do not matter. The VIP boxes do not matter. The global brand strategy does not matter. It is 11 against 11, pressure against belief, history against hunger. And right now, hunger is making history nervous. Cape Verde have put themselves one result away from something that would have sounded ridiculous not long ago. Curaçao, after being embarrassed, found the pride to stand up and take a point. Uruguay are under pressure. Belgium are uncomfortable. Turkey are already gone. The big names are realizing that the group stage is no longer just a warm-up lap. You cannot sleepwalk through this format. You cannot assume the smaller teams will politely step aside. If you are not sharp, if you are not focused, if you underestimate the wrong opponent for even 20 minutes, your entire tournament can start falling apart. That is what makes this World Cup feel dangerous. And honestly, that is what makes it worth watching until the final whistle of every game. Because now every underdog match carries a question. Is this the day the script breaks again? Is this the day a team nobody expected becomes the story? Is this the day a giant gets dragged into a fight it did not prepare for? That uncertainty is the currency of football. That is what keeps fans awake. That is what makes people text their friends and say, "Yo, are you watching this?" And for the big nations, this should be a warning. Reputation does not defend corners. History does not track runners. Market value does not save penalties. At some point, you have to prove it on grass. Bielsa said something important after Uruguay struggled. Being the better squad has to be shown. That line is the whole tournament in one sentence. You can have the better players, the bigger clubs, the richer federation, the stronger league, the more famous coach, but when the game starts, none of that guarantees you anything. You still have to show it. That is why I love this story. It is not just small team good, big team bad. It is deeper than that. It is about pressure. It is about access. It is about what happens when opportunity meets belief. It is about a format designed for money accidentally becoming a platform for meaning. And it is about fans remembering that the World Cup does not belong only to the countries that already have trophies in the cabinet. It belongs to everyone brave enough to step on that field and fight for something bigger than themselves. So where does this go from here? That is the part one cannot wait to see. Maybe the Giants recover. Maybe Spain wakes up. Maybe Uruguay survive. Maybe Germany, Brazil, Argentina, England, and the rest of the heavyweights eventually take over like they usually do. History says they probably will. But even if they do, the underdogs have already changed the energy of this tournament. They have already made the world pay attention. They have already made the big teams uncomfortable. And sometimes that is the beginning of something bigger. Because once a small nation gets a taste of belief, it does not just disappear. The players go home as heroes. The kids watching start dreaming differently. The federation gets more attention. The diaspora gets louder. The next generation grows up with proof instead of fantasy. That is how football cultures grow. Not overnight, not through one magical draw, but through moments that make people believe they belong at the table. So I want to know where you stand. Are you riding with Cape Verde and the Blue Sharks? Do you believe Curacao still has another miracle in them? Or do you think the Giants are about to snap back and remind everybody who really runs this tournament? Drop your take in the comments because this conversation is bigger than one match. It is about what we actually want the World Cup to be. A closed club for the elite? Or the one tournament where the whole planet gets a shot? And if this is the kind of football story you care about, the kind that follows the drama on the pitch and the money behind the curtain, then subscribe right now. Because the next video is going to go even deeper into the side of this World Cup that most people are not paying attention to. The politics, the pressure, the business, the chaos, and the teams that refuse to stay quiet. Trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming next. This tournament is getting wild, and we are only getting started.